Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well. My name's Liam and I'd like to welcome you to FM Dash. It's been my passion project for a little while now, and while there's a few bits that I want to improve, it's now at the stage where I'm happy to show off what it can do. Hopefully you can have as much fun using it as I've had making it so far. I was inspired mainly by Squirrel Plays and his analysis of FM players in Python, and up until then I had no idea that you could perform data exports in FM. When this goes out for full release in January, it's going to be compatible with any desktop OS as well as Docker, but you can start using the publicly available version linked in the description. For now, the max file size on the public version's 10 meg, or about 8,000 players, but I'm going to be reviewing this over time, and of course you can do what you want with the local version when it's ready. There's still a bit of cleanup needed, but this is going to be available on GitHub as soon as possible. And just to reiterate, it's completely free, no sign up needed, and while you can download the views on the website, you can also use the workshop links in the description. I'm going to be splitting this into two different sections, using the app and setting up the FM views and export. With that said, let's get into the app. So we're going to click on Get Started and then Upload Data. I've got an FM data export already, so let's upload it. I've not actually looked at this yet either, so we can try some live scouting. So there's a decent bit to take in here, but let's start off with the graph. You can change the number of results show, X and Y axis, and the graph type. I'd recommend leaving the graph type as is, and while you can see some nice performance stats like tackles per 90, XG, there's some really good views that I'll show later on that kind of exhibit that a little bit better. You can also sort by value score, which isn't necessarily to show the absolute best player, but hopefully the absolute best buy. And next up, let's take a look at the table down here, and I'll address the big elephant in the room, and that is the scoring system that I've got here. We've got some information that's in the normal data export by default, but then I've got the overall, physical, mental, technical, and value scores. This is where FM Dash diverts quite a bit from tools like FMRT and FM Scout Editor. These scores aren't directly based on current ability, and they're also not really comparable. The main reason for this is that the overall is calculated using a set of weighted attributes, which you can see at any point by clicking on weights info. If I go on, say, inverted winger support, you can see it's quite focused. There's a lot of stats that are in the red here. It's even long throws at 0. And you can see that mainly pace and acceleration is what's favoured for a winger, which is not really a huge surprise, but it's a lot more favoured towards that than you probably think. All of these scores are also relative, and that's what gives it quite a unique spin. If I was a non-league side and exploited players that were interested in joining me, I'd still see players with overalls in the high 80s or 90s. The weights themselves are still very much a work in progress, since there's not too much information out there about the exact impact that certain attributes have for every role. But there's been enough about some roles that I've been able to approximate and get some decent results while testing. But if you do end up finding some oddities while testing yourself, please let me know in the Discord channel linked in the description or on the footer of this site. Naturally, a lot of people use tools like this to simply find a better player for their team or a replacement for someone leaning for a move elsewhere maybe. And that's where you can use the upgrade finder. The only things that you have to put in here are the club, position and role. We'll put in Newcastle and we'll say, look for a good new centre mid. They support Metala. By default, it's going to look for people that are at least 3 overall better, but you can set this between 0 and, well, I think I put 50. Go find upgrades here. You can see we've got quite a few options, and if we compare to our current options, see our best is 79.6. You can see we've got Manu Kone here, he's 83.14, shows up as the best value. He's 30 though, so I think we might want to limit that a little bit. We'll say people who are max of, say, 27. You see we've got quite a few options here now, but we don't have like 2 pages like we did before. And that's generally what I'd recommend. Get enough options so you've got at least a few players to scout through and take a look at, but then don't just give yourself loads of pages to look at, because then you may as well just use a normal table view. What I found while using this app a while ago was that there was often a middle ground where you have a unique player that you need to replace, so you need to go over things with a more fine-tooth comb, but you also don't want to spend loads of time finding that perfect replacement. And that's where you can use a player's attributes as weights. And I find this really comes in handy with players such as Rodrigo, because he's quite fast, but a really good finisher, and as a winger, I find that really, really hard to come by. What you often find with this is the absolute best player that's at least in a similar position will come up, like Jude Bellingham, who I don't think we'd say is a similar player to Rodrigo, but he is just that good. And I have a bit of an alternative, which I'll show in a sec. But you can see we've got Bukayo Saka, Lamine Yamal, Arda Güler, who are all quite similar players. And then even though someone like Noah Darvish is a really, really good player, I'd say better than all those except maybe Lamine Yamal, because his shooting's not as good. He doesn't go above Rodrigo, and importantly, he doesn't go above someone like Lamine Yamal or Bukayo Saka. And it can be really handy, especially if you're in a kind of a low league save where you have someone that's maybe got 15 acceleration, 15 pace, and good finishing, but then nothing else. You want to find someone who kind of has that same skill set. So I find I do use this a bit more in kind of lower end saves where you don't just have people that have really good stats all over the place. But let's say you are at that elite level and you still want to find a similar player, you can use this little table here, which is pretty similar to kind of the main table, but we've got a similarity score here. This just applies to anyone that you click on, and this doesn't necessarily find people who are better, like you might do using the player attributes as weights, but it does find people who do just have really, really similar stats. If I remember right, it's something like 70% of stats being at least within 2. And you can see we've got a couple of interesting shouts, like Tommaso Baldanzi, who didn't come up in that in this first page for whatever reason. But we've got Ansu Fati, Havica Kvaratskhelia as well. We've got really interesting players here who didn't necessarily show up on that first page using player attributes as weights, but you just see people who are really useful as well. And I believe this only shows people who are at least 27, I think it was. But anyone above 30, they're going to be a really, really close match to whoever you're viewing at that point in time. Now, all this is pretty cool, but there's not much point if you have to keep switching between Football Manager and FM Dash. But that's where the Player Info tab comes in really, really handy. So you can click on any player and then view Player Info. And we've got normal FM stats. These aren't approximated anyway. This is purely what gets taken from the dataset that you've imported. If you have attribute masking on, it will take the average. So some players might look somewhat underwhelming because, as you know, they can be at the bottom of that range or the top, but I have to pick the middle just for calculation's sake. But we've also got some performance-based attributes here as well. This comes by default with the FM Dash view, which, as I mentioned, I'll show how to get that set up in your game later on. And by default, this is compared to everyone in the dataset. But we can also set, say, all centre mids, because you can play centre mid in this save. And you see that's where like headers won goes up quite a bit. Clearances even, strangely enough. That changes a lot. And XG, that pretty much stays the same because it's just absolutely ridiculous at 0.7 somehow. And yeah, I find this really handy for just seeing who's ready for that next step up or who might be outperforming players in that same position. While I'm personally of the opinion that stats trump everything, performance attributes can actually give a good story as well, especially if you're looking at your own players. It can be really handy to see who you might want to be dropping in the next few games or so. We've also got this interesting visualization to the top right. You'd be surprised how tricky this was to pull off, and it's still not perfect, but it does satisfy the FIFA crave that some of us have without having to actually play the game. I realised a while ago that it was more about card collecting for me than actually playing FIFA, so this is a pretty good middle ground for me. And while a lot of the attributes are approximations, because FIFA doesn't take into account things like mental attributes anywhere near as much as it should do, I think, it does at least get somewhat close. One funny anecdote I remember in testing, I think this is still a thing actually, Ousmane Dembele, because he's got really good skill moves, weak foot, he has a playstyle plus, which is calculated by, I think it's any, if I remember right, any attribute that's over 18, or 18 or over rather, you'll get a playstyle plus, most likely, depending on what it is, and then this just displays the one that's need the most attributes to match up. So for technical, it's agility, dribbling, and I think flair as well, if I remember right. But this also changes dynamically, so you can change the card type, and you see now it's acrobatic. Came quite in handy seeing that. And you can change the number of upgrades as well. It's this is again quite approximated, so see Yamal now has 91 defending, which is a bit mad. But it's at least accurate enough in most circumstances anyway. And If you want to render, let's say, Arsenal's team as Team of the Years, at this point they are playing like that. You can generate club cards and you see everyone's now Team of the Year. You can also render out a bench, which I'm going to see, do I have enough people in this for it? I do. There you go. And it's not always able to get images, which I still need to fix, but images are grabbed either from FIFA or locally. If you have this installed and you have the regen face pack, which you can download, I'll have a tutorial for that up at some point for how to get that set up, but on the web version, that is a thing by default. And it's I find this is quite handy if you mainly select just normal and then render this out. It can just be a really nice thing, in my experience at least, for kind of tracking how good your team's been over time in just an easy format. I got inspired a good bit by it's the FIFA career mode subreddit. People make their own FIFA cards on like their pro career mode, and I thought it'd be a really cool thing to have for Football Manager as well. And I've picked a decent example here, but it's not completely exact. I remember, who was it now? There was Hakimi as well from PSG, who was 82 rated, but had 54 defending. And again, it's just one of the strange intricacies with kind of comparing Football Manager attributes to FIFA, because it's surprisingly very hard to do so. Even though there's things like passing in FM and short passing, long passing in FIFA, there's things like how do you calculate anticipation and how does composure work into the things? Because for FM, you'd kind of think that's more for being a really clutch defender or really great striker, but it counts under dribbling for FIFA. So you'll see some oddities here and there, and if you see something that's really strange, please let me know in the Discord in the footer of the site or linked in the description as well. Or you can just comment on this video as well. So that's everything for features, but now let's get into preparing FM for exporting data. If you haven't already, download the scouting and squad views linked in the description below, and place them into the folders on screen depending on your operating system. So for the squad view, you can just go onto your squad, top left here, custom and import view. And then you can see the FM-squad view here. I believe the workshop version should show here as well, but if not, just try clicking on the cloud bit as well. And if you want to just get on this again after you've imported it, you can click on this as well. I've got 3 just because I've been testing this quite a lot. You'll see this kind of view where there's a lot of different performance-based numbers and quite a wide section here just to note that, yes, you are on the FM- view. You can then hold Control A, like I did there, or Command A on macOS, and then Control P even on Windows, or Command P on Mac to get this screen up to print. You want to print a web page. It's a bit of a strange way of putting it, but this just saves a HTML file locally, and save this somewhere that you remember as well, because you will need to upload it to FM-. So you might want to go a few folders up and just go to downloads. And then for the scouting view, you go to scouting, players, and then import view again, FM-search. I've already got it here, so I'm just going to click on it. And then you can do the same, Control A or Command A on Mac, and Control P or Command P on Mac, and then print to web page. What you'll see is if you've got loads of players and or quite a slow PC, this might take a little while. You'll know if it works because if you try and hover over another player while you've got the Command A, you'll see the little grey bit doesn't show up as I'm moving my mouse around like it does here. What I've personally seen as well sometimes is that after I've imported the view, Control A might just not work. Like it doesn't do this, it just doesn't do anything. You need to go to a different tab and then onto scouting again. That's the same for squad view as well, unfortunately. It's just an FM limitation. I've also found that some skins don't seem to work fully with Control A and Control P. Why? I'm not too sure. If that is the case though, you can just go to the top right and then print screen after you've selected all the players. So I'll just Control A again, wait for a sec, there we go, and print screen. You can just print a web page and then save away or remember. If you made it this far, thank you very much for listening, and I really hope you enjoy using FM-. It's been a bit of a roller coaster for the last couple months. I initially made this just to learn Python and had a really basic working version a few weeks ago, and I thought I may as well actually just try and make this something that other people can use. And I'd like to think that I'm at least nearly there. I work quite closely with devs in my day job, and I thought that I may as well join them for a bit. And it was not really going to be any more than that. I was going to learn Python, but yeah, it's become a really, really fun thing to work on. I don't have a commercial stake in this. There's no kind of buy me a coffee link. I'm lucky to be in the position that I don't need to rely on anyone's goodwill. But if you do want to kind of give back to this kind of project, the thing that I'd really wish for is when we're on GitHub, if you can star it, and if you can just share this with your friends, because I think it'd be really cool to get a decent community going and just see how I can make this even better. But for now, thank you for your time, and bye for now.